BookTube, it's Amy. I thought I'd pop in for a recent reads today and give you an update on what I'm currently reading. I don't have anything here that I've actually finished, but I've got 4 books that I thought I'd talk about that I currently have on the go. So if you've been following this channel over the last year and a half, 2 years, you'll know that I have been slowly working my way through the letters of Madame de Sévigné. And I am excited to say that I am on the 7th and final volume here, and I have just a little over halfway to go, which means I will probably finish this within the next 2 months, depending on whether I decide to sit down with it or save it for an upcoming trip, which has been an absolutely delightful way to work my way through these letters. It's been my habit over the past 2 years. Anytime I was taking a train journey, I would throw one of these red Carnavalet editions in my suitcase in my bag, and that would be part of my reading on the train or my reading for the vacation I was taking. And on a recent trip to Toronto, I threw in the 6th and the 7th volume, and I finished the 6th and started on the 7th, and I have just a little ways to go. I am on letter 972, and I have to say I've been enjoying the journey the whole way. These are letters from the 1600s between Madame de Sévigné, a French noblewoman, and mainly her daughter, and several other family members and friends. And sometimes there's juicy gossip, sometimes it's mundane, sometimes it's a report on her health or the health of family. Sometimes there are historical events thrown in. It's a pleasant mix of various things. And I think they're some of the best and most interesting collections of letters available to read. So there's that. And then I've also been reading Feltham's Resolves in this 1820 edition here, which unfortunately the front board is detached. So I take that off and I set it aside when I'm reading. But this is a collection of essays or sermons, if you will. It's slightly theological in nature, but definitely something that can be enjoyed if you're not looking for a theological or religious work. They're short essays on various topics related to, I guess, knowledge, navigating life, and I've been enjoying working my way through them. And it is a shame that the front board detached, though. And then today I started a new book here. This is one of the few books that I purchased new. It's not a new release, but I purchased it new. This is The Great Escape, The Untold Story by Ted Barris. And Ted Barris is a Canadian journalist and historian. I don't think I've read any of his works before, but this one piqued my interest because I've read an earlier book from the 1950s. I'm forgetting the author of it now, but it's also called The Great Escape. And that book is a nonfiction work that was the basis for the 1963 film of the same name, starring Steve McQueen and James Garner, and I think Charles Brosnan as well. But the 1963 film was a huge box office success, but the story itself is not entirely accurate, and I knew that from reading the earlier book. But this book, and as you can see I'm only a short ways through, this book digs in farther into the real story and looks at the real people involved in the events of The Great Escape, which was a tunnel prison break from a prisoner of war camp during the Second World War. The film makes it out as though it was a bunch of American and British officers escaping, but in reality it was Commonwealth officers. And there really weren't very many, or, really at all, much American involvement. But of course, the Hollywood film manufactured Steve McQueen's character and changed the nationalities and names of a bunch of the people involved to make something palatable to the American audience. Which isn't to say that I don't absolutely love that film. That was one of my favorite films growing up, probably my favorite Steve McQueen film of all time. But I think it is interesting and important to understand the true stories surrounding the event of that film. So the back of the book here, I'll just read it to you. It says, on the night of March 24th, 1944. And I think in the film, not only did they change, the date of the escape, but they also changed the location of the prisoner of war camp. But it says, on the night of March 24th, 1944, 80 airmen crawled through a 400-foot-long tunnel codenamed Harry and dashed through Stalag Luft 3, the infamous World War II German POW camp. It became known as the Great Escape. The breakout took a year to plan, involved 2,000 POWs, and prompted a massive manhunt across occupied Europe. All but 3 escapers were recaptured. On Hitler's orders, 50 were murdered. Best-selling author Ted Barris has revisited the story made famous by the Hollywood movie in 1963, but he has recounted this unique battle of wits and determination through the voices of those involved. With 40 years of experience as a journalist, broadcaster, and historian, he has assembled original interviews, memoirs, letters, diaries, and personal photos to reconstruct the untold story. This is Barris's 17th book, created around his duties as a professor of journalism at Centennial College and his freelance work for newspapers, magazines, and national radio and TV. He's based in Toronto. And there's review quotes on the back of this from Publishers Weekly, the New York Times best-selling author Linwood Barclay, and Matt Galloway, host of the current CBC Radio. And this is from Dundurn Press. I'll show you the front there. And it begins with a illustration of the POW camp. So as you can see, it looks very much like what they reproduced for the Hollywood movie, with all the trees and the layout. And you can see here is the tunnel that they dug out from the building underneath the fence and out underneath the wire where they escaped into the tree line. But maybe I'll just read a little bit to you from the introduction, just to emphasize what you would get in this book if you picked it up, and I highly encourage you to. I'm only a couple of chapters in, but I think it's going to be well worth my while. Especially if you've seen that Hollywood film and want to know more about how the story was changed and who the actual people involved in this escape were. So here on page 2, he says, there was no Captain Virgil Hiltz, the Cooler King, in the actual Great Escape. So Steve McQueen's character, completely fabricated, completely made up, a device to Hollywoodize the film, I guess. Nor were there a lot of Americans in the prison's north compound when the breakout occurred. Nor was there a motorcycle chase. And I think we all could guess that the motorcycle chase, the famous motorcycle chase, was an embellishment for the cameras and for the audience. When writers James Clavell W.R. Burnett and Walter Newman originally scripted the fictitious USAAF Captain Hiltz into the screenplay, they had him attempting to escape aboard a train among other fleeing Allied POWs. However, Steve McQueen, contracted by Sturgis and Murch Company to co-star in the film, had such a passion for motorcycle racing that he insisted on having the chase scene built into the film. Did the movie present authentic settings? Apparently, it didn't matter to the producers that the actual Great Escape occurred near the town of Sagan in southern Poland, not in southern Germany. So the film was set in Germany. The events in real life took place in Poland. Nor was it relevant to McQueen or the movie's creators that the escape happened on March 24th, 1944, when a meter of snow still lay on the ground, where no motorcycle could easily travel, let alone leap barbed wire fences. So it was March, it was in Poland, and there was snow on the ground, and there were not many Americans involved in the planning of this escape at all, contrary to what that Hollywood film would lead you to believe. Here are the facts of the escape. On the night of March 24th, 1944, 80 Commonwealth Air officers crawled through a 360-foot-long tunnel and slipped into the darkness of a pine forest beyond the wire of the North Compound at Stalag Luft 3 near Sagan. The intricate breakout, more than a year in the making, involved as many as 2,000 POWs, extraordinary coordination, and a battle of wits inconceivable for the time. As dawn broke on March 25th, however, German guards outside the compound spotted prisoners emerging from the exit hole, set off an alarm, and over the next few days managed to recapture all but 3 escapers. In a rage over the incident, Adolf Hitler called for the execution of all the escapers. Instead, the death list was adjusted downward, and 50 Commonwealth Air officers were executed, with perpetrators claiming the prisoners were shot while escaping or attempting to escape Gestapo custody. Their bodies were cremated and buried in a remote corner of the Stalag Luft 3 grounds to hide the truth. A hint about the accuracy of Hollywood's version of the story is evident in one of the movie's final scenes. It shows the 50 officers gunned down en masse by a German machine gun crew in an open field somewhere in Germany. In truth, after their recapture, imprisonment, and interrogation, the officers were taken out and shot in 2s and 3s by Gestapo death squads, handpicked and given license to execute the officers in cold blood. And if we move on here to the next page, he talks a little bit about some of the characters in the film and their real life counterparts. So he asked the question, was the casting as accurate as the rave reviews said? True, the hiring of Steve McQueen, Richard Attenborough, James Garner, Charles Bronson, Donald Pleasence, and James Coburn, among a cast of hundreds, made a lot of sense. The on-screen ensemble of principal actors represented the cream of Hollywood idols in the early 1960s. In an effort to make the movie plot and its characters more inviting and palatable to an American audience, the writers invented Flight Lieutenant Bob Hendley, an American in the Royal Air Force, as the scrounger inside Stalag Luft 3. Sturgis cast U.S. screen and TV star James Garner to play the part. And so we have a second American inserted into the plot. In fact, the scrounger was a 28-year-old Blenheim bomber pilot from Calgary, Alberta, named Barry Davidson. So James Garner should have been, in reality, playing Barry Davidson from Calgary, Alberta, and Steve McQueen should have been not there at all. For the key roles of the tunnel designers and diggers, Sturgis's creative team invented Royal Air Force Flight Lieutenant Danny Valinsky and Royal Air Force Flight Lieutenant Willie Dix, and cast American actor Charles Bronson and British actor-singer John Layton in the roles. The actual Tunnel King was a downed Spitfire pilot, 25-year-old Wally Floody, originally from Chatham, Ontario. His tunnel digging partners were fellow Royal Canadian Air Force fighter pilots, 24-year-old John Weir from Toronto, Ontario, and 26-year-old Hank Birkeland from Spear Hill, Manitoba. When it came to portraying the chief forager, the POW who designed many of the fake documents used by the air officers during the escape, the screenplay writers manufactured another British flyer named Colin Blythe and cast seasoned British film and TV actor Donald Pleasence, who had actually been a POW during the war, in the role. And I do have to say, Blythe's character is one of my favorites in the film. But the actual forger behind much of the document fabrication was 24-year-old Whitley bomber pilot Tony Pengelly from Truro, Nova Scotia. So Donald Pleasence should have been playing a Nova Scotian. Next, the Hollywood production team imagined one of the intelligence chiefs in the camp and parachuted into the script a British air officer named Andy MacDonald, casting Scottish-born actor Gordon Jackson to play him. In fact, among the officers conducting much of the intelligence activities was 32-year-old Kingsley Brown, a journalist and father of four from the Toronto area. To portray an officer in charge of the security of the three tunnels, Tom, Dick, and Harry, the movie producers conceived a Royal Air Force Flight Lieutenant Soren and cast British actor William Russell in the role. In fact, the security team inside the wire at the North Compound included 33-year-old Royal Canadian Air Force air gunner George Harsh, originally from Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and 24-year-old Royal Canadian Air Force bomber aimer George Sweener from Port Hope, Ontario. And that doesn't include the air officer in charge of security at the entrance of the main tunnels, the so-called Trapführer, 26-year-old Patrick Langford from Edmonton, Alberta. For organizing what were called diversions inside the compound, the movie producers invented Royal Air Force Flight Lieutenant Day Nimmo and then hired English horror and mystery film actor Tom Adams to play him. Among the actual diversionary geniuses, however, was 25-year-old George McGill, a Royal Canadian Air Force navigator from Toronto. McGill helped orchestrate boxing matches and other sporting attractions to distract German guards during some of the earliest escaped attempts at Stalag Luft III. As well, the escape committee inside the North Compound had organized diversionary culture appreciation sessions in the prison library, where 29-year-old Royal Canadian Air Force navigator Gordon Kidder from St. Catharines, Ontario, actually taught conversational German to the soon-to-be escapers. Adding to the real diversionary linguistic staff was another Canadian, 21-year-old Spitfire pilot Frank Sorsen, who taught the head of the escape committee, Roger Bushell, basic conversational Danish, as the two men exercised on the walking path inside the warning wire at the compound. In a delicious irony of casting and accuracy, the Great Escape screenplay writers chose to change Roger Bushell's name to Roger Bartlett, coincidentally the man responsible for servicing and hiding an inside the camp shortwave radio that delivered nightly newscasts from the BBC, was yet another unheralded Canadian, 24-year-old dive bomber pilot Richard Bartlett from Fort Qu'Appelle, Saskatchewan. And he goes on, but the long and short of it is that the Hollywood film completely erases the role of Canadian Air Force pilots in the escape, and makes up a bunch of Americans who weren't there. And, you know, as much as I love the Steve McQueen film, I would absolutely love to see the movie remade with Canadians in the roles that they actually played. So I'm going to enjoy working my way through the rest of this one, but it's interesting to read. And then I'm also working my way through, this is a reread for me. This is Fishers of Books by Barton Curry. This is a collection of essays on the topic of book collecting from 1931, and we have this humorous cartoon here of a book collector and his wife. As you can see, the house is on fire, and the book collector is having his wife stay in the line of danger to rescue his books for him. He cares more about his books than about his wife. Misplaced priorities, perhaps. But I do enjoy the essays in this collection. This is the second time I'm reading it, and the one I have up next here is an essay on collecting Charles Dickens and Dickens manuscripts. And I believe back in 2020 when I first purchased and read this book. I think I actually read a few of the chapters here aloud on my channel. So if you dig, you might be able to find some of my readings of the chapters from this book. But that is what I am reading at the moment. For the most part, I have a stack of 7 or 8 other books that are also sort of on the go, but I haven't touched them in a couple of weeks. And of course, I have the usual collection of, Samuel Pepys, Edward Gibbon on my shelf with abandoned bookmarks. But I hope everyone is well. And I think I'm going to stay in and read tonight because we've got 70 centimeters of snow, maybe more in the last week. So there's not far I can go outside. It's the perfect winter weather for reading indoors.